The collapse didn't come with a bang. There was no financial crash, no panic in the streets, no breaking news countdown clock. It started quietly. A few firms moved their teams to Paris. Then, some IPOs that should have listed in London didn't. And finally, the hiring stopped. Now, the City of London, the financial engine that underwrites the entire United Kingdom, is slowing down. This isn't a story about bankers losing bonuses. It's a story about a structural gamble the British state made decades ago. A gamble that concentrated the nation's economic future into 1 square mile of real estate and assumed the money would always flow. That assumption is breaking. And when the City of London stalls, the consequences don't stay in Canary Wharf. They spread outward into hospitals, infrastructure, pensions, and regional economies that were never built to survive on their own. To understand why this movement is so dangerous, you have to understand how the UK economy was deliberately engineered. For roughly 40 years, successive governments didn't just favor London, they organized national economic policy around it. The belief was agglomeration, the idea that concentrating capital, talent, and infrastructure in one place would create a hyper-productive engine that would lift the rest of the country through tax revenue and redistribution. So London was supercharged. Between 2010 and 2020, London's share of total UK real estate value jumped from 34% to 42%. The capital received world-class transport, digital infrastructure, and investment density. Meanwhile, much of north of England ran on outdated rail, weaker broadband, and underfunded skill systems. The results were stark. Median household wealth in southeast now exceeds £503,000. In the north, it's less than half that. The richest 10% of households hold 43% of all UK wealth. The bottom 50% share just 9% of it. This wasn't accidental. It was a trade-off. Manufacturing hubs in the North and Midlands were effectively told that their relative decline was acceptable because London would generate enough surplus to keep the country running. The financial sector alone contributes roughly 8.5% of total UK GDP. It's a massive engine. But this created a dangerous structure, a dual economy. On one side, London, a globally integrated, highly productive financial hub. On the other, large parts of the country with persistently weak productivity, depended on fiscal transfers rather than organic growth. For decades, this imbalance was masked by London's success. As long as the city kept expanding, the model appeared to work. But it left the UK with a fatal vulnerability: no second engine. And when you build a nation's finances around a single city, you eliminate your margin for error. If that city falters, there is no backup plan. And today, the city isn't collapsing, but it is quietly losing its future. London didn't lose its dominance because of a banking scandal or a market crash. It lost it because of a regulatory switch. Before Brexit, the City of London operated on something called passport. This allowed a bank licensed in the UK to sell financial services directly across the entire EU. One office in London gave access to Berlin, Madrid, Rome, and every other major European market. That single rule made London the default launchpad for global finance in Europe. Brexit ended passporting. It was replaced with equivalence, a temporary, irrevocable system where the EU decides whether UK regulations are close enough to allow access. Financial institutions immediately understood the problem. You cannot build a multi-decade strategy on political permission that can be withdrawn at any time. So they adapted, not with a dramatic exodus of people, but with a quiet migration of capital. Early warnings predicted 100,000 job losses overnight. That didn't happen. Instead, something subtler and more damaging occurred. According to the think tank New Financial, over 440 banking and finance firms responded to Brexit by relocating parts of their business, shifting staff, or setting up new EU entities. Banks transferred more than £900 billion in assets, about 10% of the UK banking system, to the EU. Insurance firms and asset managers moved another £100 billion. Nearly £1 trillion didn't just vanish, it simply moved jurisdiction. Europe didn't replace London with one city. It fractured the system. Dublin absorbed asset management, Paris became a trading hub, and Frankfurt gained regulatory gravity. Bank of America, for example, established its EU markets headquarters in Paris, relocating hundreds of staff. London remained important, but it stopped being central. This is where the real damage appears. Only around 7,000 jobs physically moved, but employment growth in UK finance has flatlined since the referendum. When global banks expand today, they don't add traders in London, they add them in Paris or Frankfurt. These are the missing jobs. Not just bankers, but IT workers, compliance officers, legal staff, construction crews, cleaners, caterers, the entire ecosystem that grows around financial expansion. The city isn't imploding, it's being hollowed out by thousands of rational decisions to grow somewhere else. This is where the government's gamble collapses. The entire model depended on London generating surplus tax revenue to support the rest of the UK. A high earning trader pays enormous income tax. That money funds the NHS, regional infrastructure, and pensions nationwide. When that trader is hired in Paris instead of London, the UK Treasury gets nothing. And this is happening at the worst possible moment. Northern England, already weakened by decades of underinvestment, is being hit from another direction. Manufacturing heavy regions depend on physical exports cars, chemicals, food, etc. Since Brexit, UK goods exports to the EU have fallen by around 14%. For many small firms, the new customs checks and paperwork erased already thin margins. They didn't relocate, they simply stopped exporting. So now, both sides of the dual economy are under pressure at once. The service engine in the south is losing market access, while the manufacturing engine in the north is choked by trade friction. The Office for Budget Responsibility forecasts GDP growth of about 1.4% in 2026, but finance and related services account for a large share of output. Strip out London finance, and growth elsewhere may fall towards 0.5 to 0.8%. That isn't growth. For many regions, it's stagnation. The state spent 40 years assuming London would always pay the bills. Infrastructure decayed, skills lagged, productivity gaps widened, hidden behind transfers from the capital. Now that the capital is struggling, the golden goose is sick, and the farm was never built to survive without it. There are signs of life outside London. Fintech clusters in Manchester and Leeds now add around £5 billion annually to the northern economy. That matters. It proves innovation isn't confined to the capital. But the scale doesn't even come close. £5 billion is a rounding error compared to the £1 trillion of financial activity that shifted to Europe. These are promising beginnings, but they cannot replace the loss of London's future growth trajectory. The gap is simply too large. The UK made a bet. It bet that concentrating wealth, power, and productivity in London would always work. It bet that the city would always have unrestricted access to Europe. It bet that regional neglect could be patched over with fiscal transfers forever. London lost its passport. Now the bill for decades of regional imbalance is coming due, and the money that used to pay it is being taxed in Paris and Dublin instead. This isn't just a London problem, it's a national reckoning.